The bottom half of the millennials who may not have got that opportunity to get into the property are saying, look, we want the opportunity, but we just don't feel that we've got it.
But yeah, I think that's one huge difference between the two generations was that live within your means as opposed to not so much.
Hey guys, in this video I sat down with Michael Sims from Sims Property Group and we had a really great discussion on the question of, is the great Australian dream really dead? Unfortunately, we had some recording issues, so the audio and video is not the best, but the content is dynamite, so I'm posting it anyway. We talk about this generational gap where no one can see where the other side is coming from. We talk about expectations having to change. In the business world, the word pivot has been a main term since the start of COVID, and now home buyers are getting forced to do just that. And lastly, we talk about what you can do about it. So without further ado, let's get into it. The great Australian dream. One of the things I've picked up and I've noticed from the engagement on my YouTube channel is there is a divide between basically the bottom half of the millennial generation and the top half of the millennial generation. And I think that signifies a gap in generations, because whilst these different millennials understand each other, as soon as you start going up, say to the boomers, for example, it's just chalk and cheese. It's totally different. The boomers don't get why these people are whinging so much. The bottom half of the millennials who may not have got that opportunity to get into the property are saying, look, we want the opportunity, but we just don't feel that we've got it. This growing topic that I've noticed the last 6 months, and it's a question of, is the great Australian dream dead? So today we've got Michael here from Sims Property Group. G'day, Michael.
Hey, well, thanks very much, buddy. I really appreciate you reaching out to me. And this topic is one that we debate in different forums regularly. It's so exciting because I think there's arguments for and against. And as you said, that generational gap of understanding and different life experiences that both generations have gone through will dictate what lens they view this topic through. And it's going to be fascinating as you and I explore this. We're both of the same generation, but have a generation either side of us that we're hearing arguments from.
Let's start off by really trying to understand the predicament these guys are in. Like, I can tell you there's a lot of anger going around. I can kind of understand it, right? These guys, I can tell you they're somewhere between 28, 33, 34, 35. Most of these guys, they're pretty smart. They're smart people. They earn good incomes, but they're at a stage of their life when they start trying to figure out, all right, well, how do I do all grown up people stuff as opposed to partying or playing computer games or whatever it is? I think they look at this problem and they sit there and they look at kind of, I have to buy a $700,000 or $800,000 house. More if you're in Sydney, they look at their borrowing powers. They can't even get anywhere close. They can't save for a deposit, or it's very hard, especially with the cost of living crisis. For me, it's easy to see why these people are so angry. But the thing I can't get my head around is the anger is where it's at. Like, there's very limited amount of people actually going and saying, all right, well, how do I actually solve this problem? And I guess that's where, if we take the side of the baby boomers and kind of the generation below that, they're the generation that said, hey, we had issues in our generation too, but we actually did something about it. Yeah, there's this thing where these generations just can't see where each other is coming from, and they refuse to try and kind of meet in the middle. You sell property for a living. What's your opinion? What's your thoughts on that?
I actually buy the property, so I'm a buyer's advocate. Sorry. So we take care of the buyer side. That's okay, mate. In all honesty, our industry's lesser known, so everyone here is buyer's advocate and they sort of don't really understand what we do. But yeah, we buy property. But as you were speaking then, Will, I had this image in my head of both generations sitting at the pub with a pint in front of them, drinking a beer, arguing over who's doing it tougher or who had it tougher. And you're spot on. There's the boomer generation went through, 19% interest rates at one point during their mortgage rates increases got to 9. Imagine if you had 19% now, the people would be, the homeless levels would be through the roof. But what I think one of the key differences, having spoken to and doing a little bit of research for this topic that I can gather, and we'll preface this disclaimer here, Will, this is a bit of a generalization. Everyone has different experiences in their generational property life. But one of the key things that we're finding is that boomers lived within their means to a degree. So they had things, and I remember growing up as a kid sitting on a secondhand couch because that's all mum and dad could afford, because their goal was to own the property. So they didn't need the brand new 100-inch television, the brand new car outside, and the new Nikes on their feet, which the younger generation seems to have that attitude. They want brand new now, and they're happy to be in debt up to their eyeballs because interest rates were so low. So monetary policy was a bit loose and they took those punts, and now the interest rates have gone up. They're screaming from the hills saying the government's not helping us. But yeah, it's one of the key impacts that I've found in the bit of the research I've done for this podcast with you, this YouTube video, was the living within their means for my parents' generation. And my mum, we sat down over, honestly, a glass of wine, and it was an incredible conversation. There were some tears in that. Mum was sharing some stories as she was going through the property journey with my dad, and some things that happened in their life that impacted where they've ended up. But yeah, I think that's one huge difference between the two generations, was that live within your means, as opposed to not so much. So you said the 28-year-old, I'm hand on heart, one of those. I earned incredible money in my first 15 years in my career. Incredible money, but didn't make very smart decisions with that money. I was out on weekends with friends, spending a lot of that in pubs and weekends away and things, as opposed to making the smarter decision of maybe jumping into a property a little earlier.
I think you touched on something really important there, which is expectations. I think it pays to go back and understand why people have the expectations that they do. Australia has always been an immigrating country. I mean, it's a massive issue right now. If you want something on YouTube that stirs people up just as much as housing, immigration is a great word. But the truth is, we've always been an immigrating country. And this great Australian dream extends from that. It extends from when we started immigrating British people in, the POMs in, post-World War II. The war disrupts the economy. Post-war, everything goes back to normal. The economy booms because it's going back to normal. We needed workers. What we did was we got some pommies over. They were dubbed the £10 POMs. And basically all they needed to do was pay £10 and they'd get on a ship. Kids went for free and they got shipped over to the lucky country. Away they went. I might be wrong, but I think that's where the great Australian dream of the quarter acre block comes from. Quarter acre is so much compared to a normal block now. That's the original great Australian dream as far as what I can understand. Back then, those expectations were real. The other people would come across, there was land aplenty. It didn't cost anything today like it does to develop it. Therefore, land was cheap. But I think it's actually part of the issue, because if you look at the density of property in other places around the world, it's far denser than what we have here. And I think that great Australian dream has become a part of it, and our failure to plan for higher density has meant that land has become more scarce, which has driven the property prices up. I mean, that's not the only factor. Like, there's a lot of conflating factors, but I think that's something that often gets missed. And then you think another thing with expectations is you got to understand generations like me. I'm 41 now. The last recession I remember was when I was 12 years old. I mean, we had the COVID one, but that wasn't a real recession because the government was completely irresponsible with how they printed money. My point is, if you're 41 years old and you grew up in a reasonably well-off family, you can't remember tough times. That does a certain thing to your expectations, because if you haven't had to live through tough times, you don't understand what it is to struggle. If you don't know what it is to struggle, you're generally expecting great outcomes. Unfortunately, that was just a blip in the radar of civilization. Actually, recessions, ever since debt has been created, recessions happen once every 10 years. So I feel sorry for millennials because, or the lower generations, because they've been led to believe the world we live in my opinion, is something that it's not. And it's not just them. I think a lot of people are grappling with this thing, including if you look at a governmental level, in terms of setting standards. We've set all these standards, for example, around building developments, but all these standards have been set so high, the bar's been set so high, we can't create enough blocks to develop the land. So that's what I mean. It's these expectations are actually false until they get shattered. I feel like there's going to be a period of time where these generations are actually, it's like a grieving process. They have to go through a process to change before they get to a point and go, all right, well, what do I do now? Because this thing where I'm complaining every day online, it's not helping, and it's not helping my emotional health either.
I agree, but so one thing I'm finding with the millennials is the Great Australian Dream, which you touched on, which was spot on. It went from a quarter acre block when the 10-pound POMs came out, and then the boomers were more of a piece of land that we can put our name on with a 3-bed, 2-bath home on it. That was sort of their dream that they could own. I think the strategy just has to change. And I think the millennials, I'm seeing a big trend, an upward trend for things like rent vesting as a strategy, because they want to live in a certain area that's an affluent area because they love where that is. They can't afford to buy into there. So they'll purchase a property in an area more often than not regionally. Right now, for instance, what are we in heading into February 2024? The Perth market at the moment is flying because it's affordable. So a lot of people are renting in your Sydney's, inner CBDs of Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and purchasing a property in Perth because it's their only way to get into the market. So I think that the strategy from boomers through to the millennials has been what I've seen has been the change to get them to that Australian dream. So if you ask the question, is the Australian dream dead? I don't believe it's dead. I just think we need to find different ways to achieve it and what that looks like. It may look a little different to what it did for the 10-pound poms or for the baby boomers and that generation. That's what we're seeing from buyers advocate point of view. Just that strategy's changing a little bit. We're seeing a lot of people, a lot of investors now, so a lot of boomer investors, the old adage, we will buy an investment property, we will scale that up to create wealth for us. We're seeing a lot of those now shift their attitudes, and they're going to start purchasing investment properties with the idea for their children when they turn 22, 23, 24, that they're going to have a leg up into the market to give them a little bit of a head start. So I'm seeing a big shift in those attitudes as well, and whether that's right or wrong. So it's going to be the Australian dream for what generation would they be? I never get the generations down right. Whatever that generation is, they're going to get a leg up. But that dream is just going to look a little bit different. That pathway to it's going to change a little bit. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah, I agree. Like the one thing I get in my business is, especially post-COVID, although it was happening kind of before then, it's the question of what do I do now? Again, it's that thing where, well, we expected things to be one way, but now things have changed. This isn't just millennials. This is people in all generations. The question is, what do I do now? I look at it in terms of, well, we have a choice. Before, the greatest Australian dream was just one thing, and we got given the dream because it got passed down from generation to generation, even though the land sizes kept shrinking between every generation. People need to be forced to have a vision for what their future is. And that might sound a bit woo-woo, but at the end of the day, if you cannot quantify what you want your future to be like, how are you going to plan to get it? And I think part of the problem is it's so confusing. Like, we just live in crazy town in 2023. Life is so confusing. And it's so bloody hard. So I get what you're saying. I want to say something because it's easy to say that. So I want to put you on the spot. Talk to me. I'm 33. I don't see how I can buy a property. I'm on a good wicket. I'm pissed off. You convince me of how I should go for my dreams. Like, why should I save? Like, why don't I go down the pub? Why don't I gamble all the time? Why don't I just have fun? Why don't I go to Indonesia or Bali or wherever once a year? Why should I invest in the great Australian dream?
Well, it depends what your end goal wants to be. So that would be the first discussion we have. What does your retirement look like? What do you want to do when you retire? Do you want to have a passive income? Do you want to be living in Bali? Do you want to be living on a boat on the coast? So if you're 30, what does the next 20, 30 years look like for you? And what does it look like post that? And we'll reverse engineer it. Why should you save? Achieve this dream that you're chasing, there's going to have to be some sacrificing. Between you and I, Will, and everyone else who's watching this, my older brother and I grapple with this argument regularly. He is very much live in the moment now. He loves holidaying. He loves his bintang, whereas I'm a little bit more on the other side of the coin. I want to try to build something that I can then take my kids on a great big holiday when there's enough finances in there. Putting me on the spot with you as a 30-year-old who's angry, we'd be going through what you're earning. We'd be sitting down with a financial planner saying, what can we map out to get you to your deposit? What used to be about 6 years to get a 20% deposit on average for a home is now 10 years to get that 20% deposit. So yes, there's government incentives where you can have, say, LMI insurance if you've only got a 5% deposit. We'd map what that looks like with your mortgage broker, which is you. I'll get you to sit down with that client and say, this is what it looks like from a monetary point of view. These are the figures we need. What does your wage look like? What other expenses do you have? You'll be going through things like, do you have credit cards? Because that has a huge impact on your ability and your borrowing capacity. So just going through the whole scenario, what their life looks like now, what they want it to look like, and the vehicle that we can use to get them there. Whether that's an investment property, whether it is rent vesting, whether it is a huge inheritance that's going to come through their parents. It would depend on a few variables of their life circumstances, but we would try to map that out after we've established what that end goal looks like. Did that help at all?
No, I'm still upset, mate.
You're still upset? Get a better paying job and stop drinking.
No, it's interesting to ask that question because I've come at it from a different way. And this is why I'm kind of putting the purpose, my business's mission around how do I help people answer the question of how do I make it financially, because it isn't an easy question. And I do feel sorry for a lot of people these days because they've been led to believe that everything was going to be okay. But the truth is, most of the last 15 years, the government's been borrowing money to keep up appearances. People are just angry now because they're realizing that things aren't what they were led to believe. For me, and I'm talking from experience here. Like I grew up in a family with not much resources. I was quite a negative person in my 20s. I worked in banking. It was quite easy to kind of just piss and moan and blame the bank, blame the politics of the bank, blame this person, blame that. But when you start your own business, it's not easy. It's a totally different thing. And what it does is it beats you down and it kicks you and it kicks you. You can do as much blaming as what you want, but it's not actually going to change anything. And the thing that I want to kind of communicate to people is, why are you relying on something that's out of your control to look after your destiny, to look after your future? And for me, it's more of a personal thing. It's, if you're not going to take 100% responsibility for your future in 20 years, well, that's on you. And that might be a bitter pill to swallow because, you know, the situation isn't good. Like, things have gone from pretty good to not really good for the average person pretty quick. It's not turning around. It's going to get worse. I don't think there's many people promoting that things are just going to turn around and get better. Like, we've got a long way to slide. And that's why I've put together the personal finance community, My Personal Economy. It's a free community, everyone. You'll find the links below. Jump in. Because at the end of the day, it's this mentality thing, right? If you're not taking 100% responsibility, I've seen it before. A property spook is going to come up. They're going to sell you this big scheme and strategy. And because you don't do any checking and you believe the fairy tale because you didn't take responsibility, you take big risks. And what happens is, most of the time, you'll get burned. And that's from what I've seen over the years. In this channel, I'm going to talk about crypto. I've been lucky enough to be reasonably good at crypto investing the last 4 years. The same thing happens there. People don't take responsibility for their own decisions. They don't invest their time. What invariably happens is they trust someone or something they shouldn't, and they don't get the results they want. So it's interesting, you went down one line and I go down a different line, but they're both avenues that can work.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. You can't help someone who's not willing to help themselves. And if the attitude is to blame everyone but themselves and take ownership of the situation they're in, and I completely appreciate some people are dealt just a shit hand in life. And I wholly and solely appreciate that. So I said earlier, this is a little bit of a generalization because if we were to take into account everyone's circumstances, we'd be going for about 6 months to get through everybody on this video alone. But the quicker you realize that instead of finding an excuse, let's look for a solution, there's a few different avenues you can look down. And you and I have just established 2 different avenues that you can search down. I know right now as it stands, there are properties on the market in the town that I live in, Geelong, sub 400,000, sub 350,000. Maybe it's not the 4-bed, 2-bath, 3-bed, 2-bath on 600 square meters that they wanted, but it might be a stepping stone to reach that. My partner's parents are a prime example of that. They started, their first house purchase was on a bloody credit card. I'm going back to their very first property. This is a story that we laugh at over a glass of wine most family occasions. Their first property they purchased on a credit card, post-auction, got passed in, and Greg walked in, is my partner's father, walked in and said, we'll buy it using the credit card. They've since made very smart purchases in upgrading their properties. And I can tell you right now as it stands, unfortunately, Greg's no longer with us, but Lynn, my partner's mum, is in a very, very nice house because they were willing to make that transition to the dream over a longer period of time as opposed to, I want it right now. Comes back to those attitudes we spoke about earlier. But yeah, again, I appreciate everyone has different circumstances and some people are dealt shit hands. But I can tell you right now, and you touched on it too, some people make stupid decisions. They're not smart with their money. When they're on you mentioned yourself, you're on a good wage, you're PAYG, you have the ability to borrow to buy a house or build a house, but you're not making smart decisions to achieve it. On the flip side, and I'll play devil's advocate both sides, right now, supply is not meeting demand. In 2022 alone, we had over 200,000 immigrants come into our country. That was over 101,000 properties, new properties, were taken up by that. That was 70% of new dwellings built were taken up by immigration that year. That is a substantial amount of the property that was available. Only 30% was left to the rest of the nation. So I know government policy has not helped, and it's not helping a lot of people. But you touched on it yourself. Instead of whinging about it, let's see if we can find you a solution. And that's where mortgage brokers come in, and you can plan that out and map that out for them so they know what they can borrow and what is livable for the figures, what your mortgage looks like, whether rent vesting is an option you're looking at. and you're buying a property sub 350,000, 400,000 because you can afford it while you rent somewhere else. You come to guys like us as buyers agents, people like us who understand the industry and can identify those areas that are going to give you something like some capital growth. So we talk about that stepping stone. You're buying something for 400,000 to start with. That'll grow over time, and you might be able to take that equity out and scale up again. They're all the things that we like to talk about with our clients. So is the Australian dream dead? No, I'll say it again. I don't think it is. I just think it's a different pathway now than what it used to be for a myriad of reasons. And we've just touched on a couple of them.
There's so many angles to this issue. You've got, the immigration, the housing crisis itself, the supply shortfall. You've got the generational gaps. We could go on literally for days and days and days. I'm actually interested what people think of this. Like, leave your comments below. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. Like, let's have a place where we can have our opinion, but not disrespect people who have different opinions here, because we're all in this boat together. The only way of solving this isn't kind of getting online and rah-rahing at each other. So I want to know the comments. Like, I want some feedback here, and that's going to allow us to direct the conversation better going forward. Michael, thanks again for joining us. Let's get back onto this conversation, because I get the feeling as the years roll by, this is going to be a talking point for years and years to come. So let's get you back on in a couple of months, and thanks for coming.
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate it, buddy.